Thank you. Thank you so much, Sarah. Wow, what a journey we've taken in the last day and a half. Good morning, everyone. Do you realize it's still morning? And we've gone from dark matter and dark energy to contemplating that we really don't exist, to trying to describe that of which we don't exist, to today realizing that if we do exist, ourselves are likely relational, even down to our microbes. I can't think of a single conference where we could cover so much ground in about 20 hours. So thank you, Deepak. Thank you to everyone at the Chopra Foundation that has made this amazing conference possible, and all the speakers. It's incredible. So my name is Shamini, and I come from a research field called psychoneuroimmunology. And it's quite a mouthful. Even we don't like to say the word, so we call it P&I for short. And you already learned how exciting and fun it can be to put together a group of consciousness researchers. So imagine what happens when you put together a bunch of researchers in P&I. And we all love to talk about what we do, right? All researchers do. And so you'll often hear things like, well, what do you study? Well, I study, the effects of stress on the cardiovascular system and how stress might contribute to sticky platelets. Or I study how depression, might affect disease progression and cancer. So, love the conversations, and then, oftentimes it'll come to me and people will ask, well, what is it that you study? And I say, I study healing. And they say, oh, that's interesting. Like, do you mean wound healing or something like that? And I say, no, well, I study ancient practices, ancient forms of healing, including things that are now used here today, like Reiki and healing touch and therapeutic touch and things like that. So that's usually a conversation stopper right there, because of course most people have no idea what it is. And if they do, they have certain perceptions about what it is. And here you can, of course, see the lady lying on the table saying, I had a very different idea of what Reiki was about. And, this is generally, we get this stunned response sometimes from our colleagues, and they say, well, isn't that like where you go to the spa and get your aura fluffed or something like that? I mean, Shamini, we have real issues in medicine right now. We have real behavioral issues. Why are you studying something so fluffy like healing? And I say, yes, we do. We have really significant issues in this country in terms of our health issues. Cancer, of course, chronic, cardiovascular disorder, but probably brought to all of our attention last year by the untimely death of one of my musical heroes, Prince. Chronic pain, which affects over, 100 million Americans, particularly our veterans, and is costing us over $300 billion annually. And so how are we treating it? We're treating it using a pathogenic model. The pathogenic model is, basically, and you can see kind of pathogenic thinking all over the place these days. There's something foreign inside of me. I need to get rid of it. So in this case, it's pain, which is causing suffering. Well, we don't know how to get rid of the suffering, so we're just going to numb ourselves to the pain by taking these pharmaceuticals. By the way, OxyContin has now been approved by the FDA to give to children as young as 11. And as you know, it's a very highly addicting substance. So how are we fixing that problem? Well, we're applying more pathogenic thinking to deal with the pathogenic thinking that created the problem in the first place. So to paraphrase Albert Einstein, we can't solve the problems with the same kind of thinking that we use to create the problem in the first place. But that's exactly what we're doing. And so, this is a significant issue. And so again, my colleagues will say, yeah, Shamini, we understand that. We buy that. But how is the study of healing going to help this issue? And because, again, you're talking about things that are really bordering on the verge of spirituality, and we know that can't be studied. Well, I remind them that actually, 50 years ago, our field of psychoneuroimmunology did not exist. And actually, it was less than 50 years ago that the idea that the immune system was connected to the brain was complete heresy. I mean, it was completely laughable. People couldn't even fathom that idea, let alone the idea that our emotions could affect our bodies and could affect our health. So we've come quite a ways because of the dedicated effort of a few scientists who had provocative data and sought out interdisciplinary collaborations with other scientists to forward this field. And now, of course, we know so much more. We know about the connections between our emotions, our immune system, our neural system, even to the point where a recent paper was published in Nature last year suggesting that there might be immune microvessels in the brain. Now, we wouldn't have even thought to look there a couple of decades ago because we didn't believe it was possible at all. But frontier thinking has always been a part of psychoneuroimmunology, and we can look no further than to one of the co-founders of psychoneuroimmunology himself, Bob Ader, when he expressed an understanding that when we talk about the immune system, or the cardiovascular system, or the central nervous system, we're just putting things in boxes so that we can try to dissect and understand that part of the system. But really what he was pointing to is that with very careful study, what's probably more important is to look at the relationships between all those systems. And that potentially the relationships are part of what he thought would be a single integrated network of homeostatic mechanisms. So this was Bob Ader's words a couple of decades ago. I'm going to suggest to you now that the single integrated network of homeostatic mechanisms is what we call the biofield. And how do we describe the biofield? It's a new term that has been coined by scientists in the West here for the last 2 decades or so. And if you can't read that very well, the biofield is currently described as a set of interacting and interpenetrating fields of energy and information that guide the homeodynamic functioning of a living organism. Well, there's a mouthful, and again, kind of hard to understand by many of us. So what do we mean by that? Let's just try a little exercise. We've all been sitting for a little while, so I'll invite everyone to stand up. Those of you who might be watching from afar, do the same. Go ahead and stand up for a minute. Feel your feet on the ground. If you feel like you need to move a little bit, just bounce up and down a little bit on your feet. And then rub your hands together very vigorously. Just very quickly, while at the same time, if you can, keeping your attention on the feet, touching the earth, and then just slowly pull your hands away, just a little bit, moving them back and forth a bit if you like. And you may feel absolutely nothing. There's no right or wrong thing to feel here. I just want to make that clear. But as you breathe and you feel your feet and you focus on what might be or might not be between your hands, if anyone feels any particular sensation, I'd love for you to just shout it out. Oh, woo, that's good. That's excellent. What else? Warmth, heat, pulsing, force field. Okay, great. I know you probably don't want to, but go ahead and have a seat back down. These are some of the things that, have been used to describe whatever this is between our hands. And so I think the big question is, what is that? What is it? And does it convey any useful information about our state of being and our state of health? So when we describe the biofield, there's one part that we describe that's veritable. And this is stuff that's really familiar to all of us. Things that you can measure really easily that, measure electrical potentials, for example, from the body. So the EKG, the EEG, these are all examples of biofields. And we know that measuring those aspects of the biofield, we've learned how to deduce the information and have it tell us something very meaningful about our health. And there's some really interesting, significant advances that are being made in the area of veritable biofields. And Stuart Hameroff touched on this a little bit yesterday, including electroceuticals. Electroceuticals is a phrase that's coined by a couple of my colleagues in the area of bioelectromagnetics as potentially the next wave of big pharma. And there are a lot of pharmaceutical companies that are investing in these bioelectromagnetic approaches to treating disease. This just gives you one example of the myriad of different approaches that are being used right now. Pulsed electromagnetic field stimulation, transcranial direct current stimulation, Stuart talked about transcranial ultrasound, quite a few that are being used now to look and see whether or not manipulating the biofield, that is manipulating electrical and magnetic currents at different frequencies, different pulse rates, can induce some kind of physiological change for the benefit of the living organism. Okay, so this is happening right now, and it's kind of exciting. And so the question is, where are we going with this? Are we moving past one flew over the cuckoo's nest? Maybe some of you remember that, the days of ECT, which is still sometimes used for refractory depression, to pulsed electromagnetic field stimulation for the knee. But why stop there? We can develop devices that help us focus better and play video games better. There's a company doing that. But why stop there? We can develop a device that we can put on our head, a patch that supposedly stimulates the trigeminal nerve so that when we feel tired, we can press a button and feel better. Or when we feel like we need a jolt, we can just press the button and jolt ourselves. There's a company doing that. They're not doing as well as they had thought they did. They attribute it to their marketing plan, which was very heavy. But why stop there? We can simply implant electrodes in our brains. And there's this quote from a scientist at Johns Hopkins in the Business Insider that said, now we've got a solution to the obesity problem. If we feel hungry, we can just, for those obese folks that feel hungry, they can just press a button and they won't feel hungry anymore. Great, right? I mean, is this where we want our medicine to go? This is how biofield science is being used currently. It's, potentially going to make a lot of money. But maybe some of us feel like there's something missing from this picture, right? Our own state of awareness, our own sense of who we are as human beings, our connection with the deepest part of ourselves, and even the connection with the divine. What role does that play in our healing process? So the second aspect of the biofield is the one that maddens scientists to death, and the reason why I get asked why I study this. And these are the subtle aspects of the biofield that are very difficult to measure directly, if not impossible, although people are trying. And the interesting thing about these subtle aspects of energy, which are sometimes called prana, chi, other things, ki, in many different healing traditions, is that they form the basis of indigenous medicine across the globe, and have been used for thousands of years in practices including Ayurveda and Chinese medicine, acupuncture, but are also used by a group of practitioners that are often now called biofield therapists, those who practice Reiki, healing touch, and that sort of thing. So from a scientific point of view, I find it completely fascinating to study this work because it lends itself to questioning around the aspects of healing that may be beyond the material nature. So no one is discounting the materialist explanations that we might have for some of these effects. But yet in these types of therapies, there's no stretching, there's no needle, sometimes there's no touching. So what are they doing? So for those of you who may not be familiar with these types of practices, the practitioners across the board will generally describe the process like this. They're literally emptying themselves of themselves as much as possible. They're expanding their awareness and remaining in a relatively neutral state so that they can, in essence, conspire with consciousness to catalyze the currents of compassion. And some may not use the word compassion, some may say it's more of a neutral state. But in the process of doing this with the client and the receiver, they're helping, in their perception, helping that client to connect with the deeper aspects of themselves that help to facilitate the salutogenic or health-promoting process in the spirit, the mind, the brain, and the body. So this is what they say is going on, and then the question is there any real evidence to suggest this stuff works? So we did a systematic review a couple of years ago. I did this with my graduate mentor at UCSD, Paul Mills, who was sitting right there, really the best mentor one could have ever asked for. And we did a systematic review of about 66 studies across the board, and what we found, in essence, was that there was strong evidence for reducing pain in many different populations, moderate for hospitalized populations, even some suggestion that this could be useful for dementia, although we don't understand the mechanisms at all. A colleague of mine then looked to specifically look at non-touch modalities, those that are practiced hands off the body, and he also found across the board in his systematic review beneficial effects more often than not in these studies. So one of the questions that my colleagues will sometimes say is, well, yeah, Shamini, but isn't this all probably placebo effects? And so here you see, mama pill telling daddy pill, honey, just go talk to baby pill. He just found out he's a placebo. So he must be worthless, right? There's no meaning to placebo. In fact, that's a whole discussion that we could take days to describe. The whole area of placebo is so rich and so misunderstood in some ways. And yet we as integrative medicine researchers are often put in a position where we have to do these randomized placebo-controlled trials to show that the therapy that we're looking at is more than placebo effects. Okay, so we do those studies. I'm just going to talk a little bit about one of the studies that we did. This study is published in the journal Cancer, pretty decent journal, read by oncologists and other medical professionals, and this was a randomized controlled, placebo-controlled trial of biofield healing to solve a very major issue that we still don't have solutions for. How many of you have been touched by cancer? Either someone you know or yourself? Someone you love? Okay, many of you in this room. And so many of you may know that cancer-related fatigue is the #1 complaint among cancer patients and survivors. And in fact, 1/3 of survivors, well after treatment, after their surgery, their chemotherapy, their radiation, are still suffering from debilitating amounts of fatigue that basically prevent them from doing the things that they used to do. So it's a huge problem. We don't know how to solve it yet. There's no gold standard treatment for cancer-related fatigue. So we were interested in knowing whether these biofield approaches could be useful. Because again, from the practitioner's perspective, their vital energy is depleted. It needs to be maintained. It needs to be brought up so that they can then engage in self-care practices. So we did this randomized controlled trial. We randomized our people to 3 groups and looked at them over about a 1-month period. They received sessions. Those who received sessions received them twice a day. So we had the actual healers that were, of course, matched on their expertise. And then we trained mock healers. So who were these mock healers? They were scientists. They didn't practice healing. They didn't practice yoga or meditation. They were open skeptics. They didn't really believe in this, but they weren't hostile towards it. We paid them. We trained them in the hand positions. They were fine. And, of course, all the sessions were done in silence. But, that's not really enough to be looking at a mock group if you're really wanting to tease out placebo effects. Placebo is made of many things, including relational aspects. So we actually asked our patients things like, every session, what did you believe you were getting? Do you believe you got touch alone, which we told them could have beneficial effects as well? Or do you believe you got healing? How connected did you feel with your practitioner? How much do you believe that this is helping you? We asked all those questions and we put them into the analysis. So what did we find? Here are the results. The white bar that you see there is the healing group. So we used a gold standard method called the multidimensional fatigue symptom inventory. And as you can see from the white bars, these women started out with really very high levels of fatigue. They dropped down to levels of what you would expect for the normative population. It was a huge effect size, clinically significant as well as statistically significant. What about the mock group? They were in the middle. Those are the middle bars, kind of the light gray bars, if you can see that. The dark gray are the weightless control group that didn't change. So the middle bars actually significantly dropped as well, and a pretty decent effect size. So what we took from this is simple things like coming in, interacting positively with a group of women who seem to care about your well-being, laying down on a table twice a week, engaging in self-report measures where you're measuring your mood. All those things mattered as well. But it did seem that there was something about the healing group that seemed to be, in some cases, a little different, perhaps a little stronger. So we then looked at a biomarker called cortisol variability. So how many of you have heard of cortisol, the stress hormone? Pretty much everyone, right? We think of it as a stress hormone. Like many hormones and molecules in our body, it follows a diurnal rhythm, and it turns out that rhythm is really important. So generally, as you can see from the graph, cortisol rises throughout the night, kind of peaks about 30 minutes after you wake up, and then slowly declines during the day. It turns out for breast cancer survivors, particularly those that are fatigued or depressed, that rhythm is really aberrant. There could be many different reasons for it, but you don't follow that natural rhythm, and that's an issue. Cortisol is, of course, connected to the inflammatory immune system as well. So there was actually even a study that suggested that cortisol variability is linked to mortality in breast cancer patients. So it seemed like an important biomarker. So what did we find? Well, the graph on the left shows you the 3 lines or the 3 groups there, and there was no significant difference between those groups at start. Now, the second graph that you see, the solid line, is actually the healing group. And so what we found was a significant increase in cortisol variability, or that is a decrease in slope, specifically for the healing group, statistically significantly different from both the mock group and the weightless control group. So of course we saw this result, and I said, what is this? And we put in every variable we could think of, all the placebo variables I mentioned, body mass index, age, all of these different variables that we thought could potentially explain away these results, and we couldn't. So it's a mystery. And what's interesting is it's not the only mystery. There are other studies, which unfortunately I don't have time to share with you today, that have also found influences on functioning in cancer patients, other patients, as well as biomarkers. And there are cell studies, and there are animal studies as well. But of course, there are always criticisms of this kind of work. And somebody I think already mentioned Jim Coyne. He's one of our favorite critics. And essentially, I find these criticisms really interesting because they're not so much based on study methodology or how we conduct the trial. they're really just based on their belief or non-belief of the therapy. So we don't believe in this energy healing stuff. That's not real. It doesn't exist. And so therefore, you shouldn't be doing this, and patients shouldn't receive it. So it has nothing to do with benefits to harm ratio. It has nothing to do with the actual clinical efficacy. It has to do with belief. And again, we're sort of stuck in this one way of thinking around pathogenesis. And so this is impacting the way we do medicine. Fortunately, there are leading organizations such as the Chopra Foundation, Institute of Noetic Sciences, Miraglow Foundation, and other foundations that are forward-thinking in this area and have come together to form a collaborative called the Consciousness and Healing Initiative. And one of the first activities of this collaborative was to foster a transdisciplinary science of healing. So we held this meeting, and we brought in many of the scientists, actually some of them that you've already met, that are part of this group, including Menas Kafatos, Neil Peace. We already mentioned Paul Mills, Tiffany Barsotti, who is sitting next to him, Deepak himself, and others. And we came together to discuss what is the state of the science around this area, both in cells, in animals, in humans, distant healing. How do we incorporate these into healthcare? How is it doing in healthcare? And I'm very pleased to announce that we published a special issue which can provide everyone with the up-to-date information on the science of healing, freely available at our website, which is www.chi.is. So this is just one of the things that our collaborative has been working on together. So to me, the reason why the science of healing and the study of biofield science is so exciting is because it's starting to bring us more towards a model of salutogenesis, a model that is going to help us more deeply understand our capacities for healing ourselves, but not just ourselves, for healing others, for healing this planet. Because what these studies are telling us is that our capacity for healing is great. It's actually quite profound. And so it's putting, again, that agency, our ability to act as conscious agents, back in our hands. And it's just one of the reasons why this work is so exciting and so important. In truth, at the Consciousness and Healing Initiative, we understand that there's a need for healing across all of these levels. And so if we're going to really foster the healing that we need to see in the world and the transformations that might occur in science and medicine, we need the truth-seeking aspects of the scientist and the inventor. But we also deeply need the heart of the clinician who knows what it's like to be with someone who's suffering and ameliorate that suffering in their own ways and learn from their wisdom. We also need the wisdom of the spiritual practitioner, those who see with clear eyes and who live this type of practice every day. And we also need the wisdom of the artist, those who know what it's like to connect with Source and create from that place. So together, when we come together, when we bring our communities together, we really forward a much deeper wisdom and understanding about what healing truly is. And this is what our collaborative aims to do, and we hope that you'll join us. We are actually having our first public event, November 4th in San Diego, where we'll be talking about the healing revolution, how when we place healing at the center of both our inquiry and our action, we may foster the necessary evolutions that might occur in science, in medicine, and even social impact. So you can learn more about it on our website, and I hope that you might join us. And I just want to thank every single one of you for being here and contributing to the healing that you might want to see in the world, because your healing matters greatly. Thank you.